That's what the whole car cost her. $4 for a sealed boxcar sitting rusted on a dead siding, a car nobody in Dry Fork Junction would have touched with a borrowed pole. Water-stained, padlocked, and stinking, folks said, of something gone wrong inside. The auctioneer near begged for a bid just to be rid of it. And when that old Apache woman raised one steady finger and said the number out loud, the whole depot laughed. Grown men slapped their knees. Somebody hollered that she'd bought herself a coffin on wheels. She didn't laugh back, she didn't say a word, she just waited for the key. I was standing close enough to see her hands, and her hands weren't the hands of a woman who'd made a foolish trade. Her hands were the hands of a woman who already knew exactly what was locked inside that car, and had been waiting 11 years to open it. I'm the fool who helped her turn the latch, and I have spent the rest of my life trying to forget the sound the door made and failing. Here's what was inside. The gavel came down like a dropped horseshoe, flat and final, and the whole platform broke up laughing. I remember the laugh better than I remember the heat, and it was a July that could cook an egg on a rail spike. Men doubled over. Cole Prout, who ran the feed store and never had a kind word that didn't cost somebody, howled so hard he had to grab the shoulder of the man beside him. Somebody near the water tower yelled that she'd bought herself a coffin on wheels, $4, delivery not included, and that got another wave going. I didn't laugh. I want to say that was decency, but the truth is I was too busy watching her hands. I had a habit even then, still do, of rolling a coin across my knuckles when a thing put me on edge. Old Indian head penny, worn near smooth. My late wife Margaret had carried it for luck and left it in a coat pocket for me to find after, which is a cruelty I've never entirely forgiven her for. I was rolling that penny raw over my fingers, over and over, standing at the edge of the crowd, and I was watching the old woman's hands because her hands weren't doing anything at all. That was the thing. Everybody else on that platform was in motion, laughing, spitting, waving hats, nudging. She stood at the front of it dead still, one hand folded over the other at her waist, and she looked at the boxcar the way a person looks at a grave they've walked a long way to reach. They called her the Widow Cade in town. Her husband had been Thomas Cade, a freighter with a bad leg and a good name, dead 4 winters by then of a lung that quit on him. She'd kept his little haul-and store operation running better than he ever had, and that alone was enough to make certain men in Dry Fork dislike her before you even got to the rest of it, because the rest of it was that she was Apache. Chiricahua, though I didn't have the word for the band right in those days. She'd married Cade back before the trouble boiled over, back when a thing like that could pass, and she'd stayed on after, running his ledgers and his mules, going to no church and asking no favors, and the town had never once decided whether she was one of theirs or one of the ones they'd shipped east on the very rails we were all standing beside. I only ever heard her say her own name once later, and I could not hold it right in my mouth when she said it, so I won't insult it by guessing at the spelling now. In this telling, she is the Widow Cade because that is the name the day belonged to. The unclaimed freight auction ran the second Saturday of every month, and it was mostly nothing. Crates of hardware some shipper had abandoned. A sewing machine once that I recall a schoolteacher fighting over. Barrels. The railroad hated storing dead freight and would sell a man near anything to clear a siding, and half the county turned out for it the way they'd turn out for a hanging or a revival, the entertainment being roughly the same in Dry Fork. The sealed car had been the last lot, and it had a story on it before anybody bid. It had come in on a misrouted manifest the better part of 2 years back, is what the station master said. A car that should have gone somewhere east and instead sat, and got kicked onto the dead siding when nobody paid the storage, and there it aged in the sun with its doors padlocked and its papers lost. Kids threw rocks at it. There was a smell some summers, they said, and a story grew up the way stories do, that a hobo had died in it, that it was full of spoiled hides, that a man who'd pressed his ear to the side had heard something and never came right after. All nonsense. But the railroad wanted it gone, and no man on that platform would give a nickel for a locked car that might hold a corpse and might hold nothing but ruin, and the auctioneer, a sweating fellow named Dell, had worked himself hoarse trying. "Come now," Dell had been saying. "Solid car. Good iron in it if it's nothing else, boys. Good iron, scrap it out and you've doubled your money. Do I hear $1, a half a dollar? Somebody give me a reason to go home." And into the flat dead middle of that, with men already turning to leave, the Widow Cade raised one finger and said, clear as a struck bell, $4. That's when they laughed. 4 was absurd. 4 was 350 more than a scrapper would have risked. She'd bid against nobody and beat herself doing it, and the whole crowd understood it as either a crazy woman's mistake or an Indian's. And I heard both words used, and worse. And Dell, who wasn't cruel so much as relieved, banged his gavel down before she could come to her senses. "Sold," he said. "To the widow, $4, and God keep you, ma'am." She paid it out in coin from a small beaded pouch, counting it into Dell's palm without hurry, and while she counted, the crowd stayed to watch, because a fool and her money were the best show the depot had offered in months. Somebody asked loud whether she wanted it gift-wrapped. Somebody else said she'd finally found a house she could afford. I'll tell you what turned me from a watcher into a party to the whole thing, because I've asked myself since, and the answer isn't flattering. It wasn't kindness. It was that I couldn't stand the laughing. Margaret had been dead 2 years by that summer, and I'd spent them learning that the sound of people enjoying themselves at another's expense had come to sit in me like swallowed glass. I don't defend it. I just know that I put the penny in my pocket and walked up out of the crowd toward the front, toward her, mostly to have my back to all those open mouths. "You'll want the key," I said. Stupid thing to say. She had the bill of sale in her hand, of course she'd want the key. She looked at me. Up close her face was older than the town gave her credit for and steadier than any face on that platform, lined deep at the eyes. And those eyes went over me once quick, the way you'd check a fence for the loose wire, deciding what I was. I don't know what she decided. But she said, "The man has gone to find it," meaning Dell, who'd gone rummaging in the depot office, and then she said nothing else, and we stood there together a moment in the general noise like two rocks a stream had left dry. "We's Harmon," I said. "I run cattle out past the fork." "I know who you are," she said, not unkind, just fact. She'd have known everyone. A woman in her place would have to. Dell came back with a ring of keys and a cold chisel besides, because he didn't figure any key on the ring would fit a padlock 2 years lost. And he was right. None did. And so the opening of that car became a public labor with an audience, which is exactly what nobody sane would have wanted and exactly what the day insisted on. The car sat high on the dead siding, its wheels gone orange, its wood gone the gray of old bone. Up close it did have a smell, but it wasn't rot, and I registered that even then, some part of me filing it away confused. It was a dry smell. Dust and old cloth and something underneath that I couldn't name, something that put a thread of memory through me I couldn't follow, the way a house you've never been in can still smell like your grandmother's. Dell set his chisel to the padlock hasp and beat on it with the flat of a maul, and the sound of it rang out over the whole platform, iron on iron. And with every ring the crowd came a step closer, drawn in, the laughter thinning now into a lower kind of noise, curiosity with an edge on it. Men who'd been leaving came back. Boys wormed to the front. Cole Prout stood with his arms crossed and his mouth already shaped for whatever mean thing he'd say when the door swung open on a car full of nothing. I was near enough to the widow to hear her breathe, and I'll tell you her breathing had changed. All that stillness she'd worn like a coat, and now under it, when the chisel bit and the hasp began to give, I heard her draw a breath that shook coming in. One breath. She caught it back into that stillness so fast I might have imagined it. But I'd stood at enough deathbeds, and one graveside that mattered more than the rest, to know the sound of a person holding themselves together by main strength. And that was the sound she made. She wasn't a fool who'd wasted $4. That was the moment I understood it, standing in the heat with Margaret's penny going cold in my pocket. She knew. Whatever the town thought was locked in that car, she knew different, and she had bid $4 against her own good sense and let 100 people laugh at her rather than say out loud what she knew, because saying it out loud would have cost her something she wasn't willing to spend in front of them. The hasp broke with a crack like a shot. A couple of the boys jumped. Dell pulled the ruined padlock free and dropped it in the dirt, and it lay there, and for a second nobody moved, because now the thing was only a door, and behind the door was whatever was true. "Well," Dell said, wiping his face, wanting somebody else to do it. "It's your car, ma'am." She stepped up to it. She put both her hands flat on the wood beside the door, not on the handle, flat on the boards, the way you'd steady yourself, or the way you'd greet a horse, or the way, I have come to think, you'd touch the side of a coffin before they lowered it. And she stood like that a long moment with her head bowed, while 100 people held their breath in the July heat. Then she looked back over her shoulder. At me. Not at Dell, not at the crowd. At me, the fool who'd walked up front to get away from the laughing. "Help me," she said. "It is heavy, and I will not have it stick." And God help me, I did. The door didn't want to move. It had rusted into its track and swelled in the frame, and it took the both of us, me hauling on the iron handle, her shoulders set against the edge, and finally Dell and a young cowhand named Bose throwing their weight in too, before it gave all at once with a shriek that I have heard in dreams for 40 years since. A long, tearing metal shriek, and then the door stood open, and the smell rolled out over all of us. That dry smell, cloth and dust and cedar, and under it sweetgrass, I know the word now that I didn't then, and wood smoke soaked so deep into everything that opening the car was like opening a memory of a fire. And the light went in, and we saw. I have tried a great many times to say what was in that car in a way that lands right, and I always fail, because a list is only a list, and what was in that car was not a list. But I'll give you the list because it's all I have. Bundles, dozens of them, scores, stacked and lashed and laid in rows the length of the car, bundles wrapped in hide and in trade blanket and in canvas gone stiff. Cradle boards. I counted later 11 cradle boards, the beaded kind, some plain, one with a little sunshade hood worked over in yellow and white beads by hands that had loved the child it was made for. Baskets, coiled baskets nested one in another, water jars sealed in pitch, a whole life's worth of a people's baskets. Rolled hides. Bows unstrung and laid flat, a drum. Cooking pots, iron and clay both. Bundles of dried herbs turned to dust-brown ghosts of themselves. Moccasins in pairs, big and small, tied together at the laces, dozens of pairs. A child's toy horse cut from wood and worn smooth at the mane where a thumb had rubbed it. And it went back and back into the dark of the car, all of it laid in with a care that no freight handler had ever taken with anything, laid in the way you'd pack the belongings of the dead, or the way you'd pack the belongings of people you meant to send somewhere far and never expected to send back. Because that's what it was. I understood it slow, standing there, the way you understand a thing your whole body already knows before your head catches up. This was not lost freight. This was seized property. This was everything the Army had taken off a band of Apache people when they'd rounded them up and marched them to the railhead and shipped them east to the forts in Florida and Alabama. Everything that couldn't go with them, or wasn't allowed to, tagged and crated and put on a car to be sold or stored or lost. And lost is what it had been, misrouted, forgotten, kicked onto a dead siding in a town that had cheered the trains going the other way. A whole people's household. A whole people's holy things and cooked pots and cradles for babies, sitting 2 years in the Arizona sun while boys threw rocks at the side of the car and men made up stories about a hobo dying in it. The platform had gone quiet. That's the part I need you to feel. 100 people who'd come to laugh, and not one of them was laughing now, because even the meanest man there, even Cole Prout, even a man with a swallowed heart could stand at the mouth of that car and understand, wordless, that he was looking at something that should never have been for sale. The widow Cade stepped up into the car. I put my hand out to help her, and she didn't take it. She went up on her own, hitching herself over the sill, and then she stood inside among all of it in the barred July light coming through the door, and she was very still again, and then she was not still at all. She began to move down the rows, not fast. She'd stop at a bundle and put her hand on it and go on, stop at a cradle board and stand. She was reading it, that's the only word, reading the car the way you'd read a page, and I saw that she knew these things, not this thing or that thing. She knew them. She'd know whose basket that coilwork belonged to, whose hand had beaded that sunshade, whose child had worn those small moccasins tied at the laces. This wasn't a stranger's grief she was walking through. This was her town boxed up. These were her neighbors and her kin, everything they'd owned, everything they'd been. And she was the one who'd married a white freighter and stayed. And so she was the one who hadn't been on that car 11 years ago. And so she was the one left to walk down the rows of what remained and touch it and know every name. Somebody in the crowd, I never learned who, and it's as well I didn't said low but not low enough. Reckon there's money in it. Curiosities. Folks back east pay for that beadwork. I have been a coward most of my life in most of the ways that count. But I turned around and I found the man's general direction and I said, "You say one more word and I will put you under this car." And I meant it so plainly that the whole crowd felt it and the man shut his mouth. And I turned back around and my hands were shaking. And I got the penny out of my pocket and rolled it hard across my knuckles to make them stop. Because he wasn't wrong is the thing. That's what turned my stomach. There was money in it. There'd be men in Dry Fork by nightfall figuring the value of a car full of authentic Apache curiosities. And the widow Cade owned it now for $4, free and clear, bill of sale in Dell's own hand, and the law would back her. But the law was a thin thing, and there were a lot of men in that county and one old woman, and I could see the whole ugly shape of the days to come already forming up. She'd stopped. Far back in the car, near the end of the rows, she'd stopped, and she was standing with her back to us, and she wasn't moving at all, and something in the shape of her back made the whole platform go stiller than it already was. "Ma'am," Dell said. She didn't answer, she sank down. Just folded down onto her knees in the barred light among the bundles, slow, like something let go of the strings holding her up, and she reached out with both hands to a small bundle no bigger than a loaf of bread, wrapped in a scrap of red trade cloth faded near to pink, tied with a cord, and she took it up in both hands and held it against herself and bowed all the way over it until her forehead near touched the floor of the car. And she made a sound. I won't try to write the sound. It wasn't loud. It came out of her low and it went on, and it was in her own language, words I didn't have and don't have, but you don't need the words. Everyone on that platform knew that sound. It's the oldest sound there is. It's the sound my own throat made 2 years before at a graveside with a fresh-turned pile of red dirt in front of me and Margaret under it. And I'll tell you, standing there in the heat listening to that old woman make it, I felt my grief and her grief reach across the whole gulf of everything that was supposed to keep us strangers, and touch. I climbed up into the car. I didn't decide to. I just found myself doing it, over the sill and down the rows, careful of the bundles, until I was standing near her, not close enough to crowd, and I got down on one knee in the dust of that terrible sacred place. "What is it?" I said, quiet just for her. "What did you find?" She didn't look up. She was rocking, barely, over the little red bundle. "I told my sister I would find them," she said. Her voice was wrecked and even. "When they took her, I told her, I said, whatever they take from you, I will find it and I will keep it until you come home," she breathed. She did not come home. None of them came home. Fort Marion and then the other place and the coughing sickness and the children. She stopped. She pressed the red bundle to her mouth. "For 11 years I have gone to every auction in this country, every sale of freight, every trader looking for one thing off that car." "This," I said. "This," she said. And she turned the little red bundle in her hands, and with fingers that shook now openly, she loosened the cord and folded back the faded cloth, and I looked. God forgive my looking, because I could not look. And inside the red cloth was a cradleboard hood, just the hood. The little curved shade that arches over a baby's face on the board, taken off its frame and wrapped alone, and it was beaded over in a pattern of small white stars on a field of deep blue, hundreds of them tiny, each one set by hand, and even ruined by years. It was the most careful, loving, painstaking thing I have ever seen made by human hands. "My sister's daughter," the widow Cade said. "She was making it while she carried her, every night by the fire. Stars because the baby would be born in the cold moon," she said, "under all the stars." Her thumb moved over the beadwork, not quite touching. "She never finished it. You see here, she never finished this corner. They came before she finished." I looked at the corner. The stars stopped. A field of blue with the pattern half laid and then nothing, the thread ends still there, waiting 11 years for a hand to come back and take them up. "The baby," I said, and then wished I hadn't, because I already knew. Everybody always already knows, but she answered me anyway, and she deserved to have somebody hear it, so I made myself be somebody who heard it. "Born on the train," she said. "My sister sent word once, a letter a soldier wrote for her that took a year to reach me. Born on the train going east, lived a season at the fort. Then the coughing sickness took the little ones first, the way it does." She folded the blue cloth of stars back over, gentle, gentle. "There is no grave I can go to. There is no place. There has never been one place in all the world I could go and say, here, this is where she is. This is a thing that was hers." She looked up at me finally, and her face was wet and perfectly calm, which is a thing I did not know a face could be until I saw hers do it. Now there is. I have thought about that moment more than I have thought about almost anything in my life. About what it means that a woman spent 11 years and every spare coin walking to every freight auction in the territory on the chance, the wild, near impossible chance, of finding one half-finished cradle hood off a car she couldn't even be sure still existed. And found it. $4 and 100 people laughing, and she found it. I don't call it luck. I've never been able to call it luck. I don't have a better word, but I know luck isn't it. We sat in the car a long while. The crowd on the platform thinned. I heard it happen behind me. the shuffle and murmur of people who'd come for a show and gotten something they didn't have the equipment to hold, drifting off, ashamed maybe, or just emptied out. Dell stayed. Bose the young cowhand stayed, standing by the door with his hat in his hands like he was at a funeral, which he was. Then came the part I have to tell straight, because it's the part that mattered. Cole Prout came back, near dusk, with 2 other men and a proposition, and a way of standing that told you the proposition had teeth behind it. He'd figured the value the way I knew somebody would. He offered her $40 for the carload. 10 times what she'd paid, generous. He said the word generous, and he stood at the mouth of the car with his thumbs in his belt and told her it was more money than she'd see in a year of hauling freight, and that there'd be trouble. He was sorry to say, real trouble in a town like this, with a woman like her holding a car full of goods that men would want. And wouldn't she rather take the money clean and be shut of the trouble? It was a threat wearing a hat. Everybody there knew it. And here is the morally heavy thing, the thing I've turned over 40 years because it wasn't heavy the way you'd think. She could have kept it all, it was hers. Every basket, every cradle board, every star-beaded hood, hers, $4, free and clear, and Lord knows she had more right to it than any soul in that country. And I braced myself, standing beside her, to help her hold on to every last thread of it against Cole Prout and every man like him, whatever it cost, and I was ready to, I'd have fought for it. I want that on the record. She didn't keep it. She stood up in the door of the car with the blue star hood held against her chest, and she looked at Cole Prout, and she said, "No." And then she said the thing I didn't expect. She said, "It is not mine to sell, and it is not mine to keep." She looked back into the car, down the long rows of it in the failing light. There are people still living who own these things. At the fort in the Indian Territory, where the ones who lived were sent at the end. There are names on these bundles that I know, and some of those names are still breathing. She turned back to Prout. "I'm going to find them. I'm going to send every basket and every pot and every cradle back to the hands it belongs to, or to their children, or to their children's children, for as long as it takes and as far as I have to send it." She held up the star hood just slightly. "This one I will keep. Because there is no one left of it but me, but the rest goes home." Cole Prout stood there with his $40 and his threat, and no place to put either of them. Because you cannot buy and you cannot bully a thing that a person has already decided to give away. He left. They all left finally. And it did cause trouble, I won't pretend it didn't, there were hard months. And a fire got set at Cade's storehouse that I've always laid at Prout's door, though I never could prove it. And it was slow, and it was costly, and she did every bit of it anyway. Wrote letters. Paid a Spanish-speaking clerk to find the names, then paid to find where the names had been sent, then paid the freight out of her own thin pocket to send a people's belongings back across the very country they'd been marched over. It took her years. She did not finish it in her lifetime. I helped where she let me, which was less than I wanted and more than I deserved, and when she got too old for it, she gave the ledger of it, the real ledger, every name and where it went, and where it still needed to go, to a granddaughter of one of the names. A young woman come out from the territory, and that young woman took it up and kept on. The widow Cade is a long time gone now. I'm the last one left who stood on that platform, I expect, and I'll tell you the thing I carry. She kept the star hood on a shelf in her house, the blue field of stars with the one corner never finished, and I asked her once, near the end, why she never had somebody finish it. She had the skill, or she could have found hands that did. 11 years of stars and one bare corner, why leave it undone? She looked at it a while, then she looked at me and she said, "Wait, I've got the penny still. Margaret's penny. I've had it in my pocket 40 years, and I never did tell you why I couldn't put it down, and I think now it's the same reason, exactly the same, and she knew it. She knew it before I did, that's why she told me and not somebody else. She said some things you don't finish. She said you leave the corner open so the ones who are coming to fill it know there's still a place kept for them. She said a finished thing is a thing that's given up. I've got a lot of things I never finished. I understand them all a little better than I want to. The car's long gone for scrap. The town's mostly gone too. But somewhere in the Indian Territory that isn't called that anymore, in some house I'll never see, there is a basket back on a shelf where it belongs, and a cradle board, and a wooden horse worn smooth at the mane, because an old woman everyone laughed at spent $4 and the rest of her life sending a people home. And there is a hood of blue cloth with a field of white stars and one corner left open on purpose, and I like to think somebody's hand, someday,